We're going to deal in this session on the nature of truth. Francis Schaeffer, the founder of L'Abri Fellowship and a man who mentored me as a young man, said this: "In this fallen world, things constantly swing like a pendulum from being wrong in one extreme way to being wrong in another extreme. The devil never gives us the luxury of fighting on only one front. This will always be the case." So, as Christians, we need to be fighting on two fronts, not one front. And if we're only fighting on one front, we are probably missing another battle that's going on. This diagram of a point on a line I saw at a dinner table with Francis Schaeffer. He never spoke on this. He never put it in any of his books. But it was one of the profound things that shaped my life when I was living in his home at L'Abri in Switzerland. And he drew a line, and he put a pinpoint on the line, and on one side he put right, the other side he put wrong. And as Christians, we tend to divide things between right and wrong. And we want to be on the right side. And so we want to be on the correct side of this pinpoint. And if we are very conscientious, we want to stay away from that point on the line. But when we see the things in this way, you have grace on one side and law on the other. And you see this within Christendom. Some churches focus on grace, some focus on law. Some people, in terms of their personalities, focus on grace, and some focus on law. Or you have this division between free will and predestination, between responsibility and sovereignty, between faith and works, between unity and diversity, between feminism and sexism. And we separate these things, and if you are on one side of this point, you are right, and if you are on the other side of the point, you are wrong. Schaeffer drew another diagram with 2 points on the line. And his emphasis was that the scriptures speak of God's sovereignty, and they speak of man's free will. They speak of faith and works. But when we separate them, we develop whole denominations or whole groups of people. Well, I believe in free will. Well, no, I believe in predestination. No, it's works-based salvation. No, it's faith-based salvation. And we divide each other around this point on the line. And what Schaeffer is saying, no, you can be wrong on either side because there's 2 points on the line. And we need to live within the tension of these 2 points. And you can go outside on either side and be wrong. G.K. Chesterton, in his profound book on orthodoxy, spends a whole chapter on this concept. Chesterton is known as the Prince of Paradox. And he says that we need to hold these bright colors in tension. We shouldn't try to dissolve them into some pink or some purple. We need to leave the bright colors in place because God wants us to live in faith within the framework of these things. So you have on one point, you have grace, on the other point you have law, and freedom is found in the tension between grace and law. Freedom is found between free will and predestination. It's not just one thing or the other, it's both, and we are to live within that tension and live creative lives within that tension. There's responsibility and there is God's sovereignty. God is sovereign and we are responsible for the decisions that we make. Both of those things are true. You have faith and you have works, and one isn't more important than the other. The Bible speaks of faith and works. It speaks of unity and diversity, and life is found between these concepts, and death and destruction is found when you go outside on one side or the other. And in terms of the discussion that we are having about the nature of men and women, the nature of family, the dignity of women, you have unity and you have diversity, and life is found between those two. On one side, if you go out on the side of diversity, you end up with sexism. If you go on the outside of unity, you end up with radical feminism. And you can live in either of these places, but they are not good places to live. We are to live within the tension of the unity and diversity, and this is where you see the complementary nature of male and female, equal but different. Schaeffer would speak of the pinnacle. The pinnacle, we see these in Arizona. We have a place in Arizona called Monument Valley. And there are these pinnacles that rise up out of the desert. And when you're on top of the pinnacle, you can fall off on more than one side. And if you are on a cliff and you think of truth as a cliff and you say, I want to stay away from this cliff, so you move and you back further and further away from the cliff, what will you do? You'll fall off on the other side. And Schaeffer said this is what the concept of truth is. It's like a pinnacle, and you can fall off on more than one side. Monism is an extreme. Reality is a unified whole. There is no distinctions. Everything is interchangeable. But the other cliff is atomism. No, everything is different. And some things are more important or higher than others. There are two cliffs, as it were, and we can fall off either way. And if we don't keep both of the cliffs in our eyesight, then we know we are going to end up falling off one of them. Raphael did a painting called The School of Athens to capture this concept. And in the middle of the painting, there are two figures, Plato and Aristotle. Plato is on the left, and he is holding up his right hand and pointing a single finger to the heavens. And he's saying everything is ultimately one. Ultimate unity of all things. Aristotle is holding out his right hand with 5 fingers splayed. And he said, no, everything is diverse. And we discover truth through our 5 senses, exploring the physical world. So you have on one side, in monism, you have absolute unity, and in atomism, you have absolute diversity. You have radical feminism on one side and sexism on the other. Men and women are equal in being versus sexism, where men and women are different in function. And these lead to two different ideological models of the relationship between male and female. Another way to understand it is a child's mobile. All of us have seen a mobile over a child's crib, and it's always in movement. And why is it in movement? Because it is balanced. And whether it's a 3-part mobile or a dozen-part or 2-dozen-part, if you take off one of the parts, what happens? The mobile collapses and becomes static. Truth is balanced. It's finely balanced like a child's mobile. And if you take off one part of it, it becomes lifeless. So the complementarian position is that men and women are equal in their being. They have equal worth, equal dignity. And men and women are gloriously different in function. And the difference in their function is glorious, and it is to be celebrated as wonderful and as glorious. Nature, when God designed nature, we're not talking now about Darwin and evolutionism, where we are a cosmic accident. No, we're talking about God, a designer, an architect, a creator. The creator who designed the universe, designed male and female, designed us for a purpose, and into creation, he created the binary nature. So we see binary pairs in Genesis. You see in Genesis 1, heaven and earth. You see light and dark, day and night, the waters above and the waters beneath, the sea and the dry land, the greater light, the lesser light. And at the end of creation, you see the great binary, men and women. Complementary, binary, made for each other. N.T. Wright says this, that the sequence in Genesis 1 is pointing to heterosexual marriage at the climax. It's all about male and female. 7 pairs of binary realities ending with male and female. Note the complementary nature of the binary pairs. They were designed to work together to complement each other. And the part of the pair derives its full complementarity and significance from its connection to the other part.
What do you think are the major challenges to the church and the Christian message in the light of the current legislation on the redefinition of marriage?
Yeah, I mean, obviously huge issues there, and there's no way we can lay them all out tonight. I do want to say a word about a word. When anybody, pressure groups, governments, civilizations, suddenly change the meaning of key words, you really should watch out. If you go to a German dictionary and just open it at random, you may well see several German words which have a little square bracket saying NS, meaning National Socialist or Nazi, that the Nazis gave those words a certain meaning. In post-1917 Russia, there were whole categories of people who were called former persons because by the communist diktat, they had ceased to be relevant for the state. And once you call them former persons, it was extremely easy to ship them off somewhere and have them killed. In the same way, there was a letter in the Times Lit Up just a few weeks ago saying that when we're talking about assisted suicide or something like that, we shouldn't actually use words like suicide and killing and those sort of words, because those imply that you shouldn't do it, whereas now our civilization is saying that maybe there are reasons for that. And I find that sort of stuff chilling, the attempt to change a bit of an ideology within a culture by changing the language. Now, the word marriage for thousands of years and cross-culturally has meant man and woman. Sometimes it's been one man and more than one woman. Sometimes, occasionally, it's been one woman and more than one man. There's certain polyandry as well as polygamy in some societies, in some parts of history. But it's always been male plus female. Simply to say that you can have a woman plus woman marriage or a man plus man marriage is radically to change that because of the givenness of maleness and femaleness. And I would say that without any particular Christian presuppositions at all, just cross-culturally that's so. With Christian or Jewish presuppositions, or indeed Muslim, then if you believe in what it says in Genesis 1 about about God making heaven and earth, and the binaries in Genesis 1 are so important that heaven and earth, and then the sea and dry land, and so on, and you end up with male and female. And it's all about God making complementary pairs which are meant to work together. And the last scene in the Bible is the new heaven and new earth, and the symbol for that is the marriage of Christ and his church. So this stuff, it's not just one or two verses here and there which say this or that. It's an entire narrative which works with this complementarity, so that a male plus female marriage is a signpost or a signal about the goodness of the original creation and God's intention for the eventual new heavens and new earth. If you say that marriage now means something which would allow other such configurations, what you're saying is actually that when we marry a man and a woman, we're not actually doing any of that stuff. This is just a convenient social arrangement, a social and a sexual arrangement, and there it is, get on with it. And it seems to me that it's interesting. It isn't that, I think, that is the downgrading of marriage. It's something that has gone on clearly for some time, which is now poking its head above the parapet.
Absolutely.
That if that's what you thought marriage meant, then clearly we haven't done a very good job in society as a whole, in the church in particular, in teaching about just what a wonderful mystery marriage is supposed to be. So, I mean, simply at that level, I think it's a nonsense. It's like a government voting that black should be white. You could vote that if you like and pass it by a total majority, but it isn't actually going to change the reality.
The wonder of binary male and female transcends nature, is revealed in the reality of the created order, and reflects the truth of special revelation. God not only revealed himself through his word, he revealed himself through his works. And his work speaks of male and female, and we can look at his work and see this complementary nature. One of the women that I've studied for this series of lectures is a maternal feminist who lived 150 years ago. Her name is Lydia Signore, and she wrote a series of letters to young women. A good friend of mine gave me a copy of her book when I was preparing these lectures. And I was stunned by two things: the beauty of her words and the incredible universe that she created with those words about male and female. She said things that I had not heard before, and I had not heard them before in such a beautiful way. She said, But still, wherever the brute force of the warrior is counted godlike, woman is appreciated only as she approximates to sterner natures. When you look at brute force, physical strength is what God is godlike, then anything that is not physically strong is inferior to the godlike. And so women who do not have the same sterner nature of physical strength as men are deemed inferior. Professor Ivy George from Gordon College said this: when woman's work of caring is rendered invisible by societal arrangements and structures, a kind of social feminicide is in progress.
And so my mother decided that she was going to be a strong, independent woman who did not need any man. And that has been the world that I grew up in. You know, my mother was not accountable to anyone. She did a good job raising us, providing for us physically, but the lack of a father figure did affect us, me personally, because I did not know weakness. Okay, weakness to me was being a woman, being sensitive, crying, expressing my emotions to me was weakness because my mom was strong.
We first kill feminine. And when we kill feminine, eventually we will kill female. Because feminine and female are not valued. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, men and women were maternal feminists. They understood that women were significant in both their being and in their function. They were equal to men. And feminism came along in the 1960s and began to turn that over. And in the 1970s, there was a debate going on within feminist circles between people that were known as equality feminists and difference feminists. And the equality feminists are now known as the egalitarian feminists or modern feminists. The difference feminism were essential feminists. They said that men and women are essentially different, and that is a good thing. So egalitarianism said it focuses on the basic similarities in male and female, and the goal is the equality and interchangeability of men and women in all spheres of life. Women out of the home is the goal. It is better for women to be out of the home than in the home. It is better for women to be defined by a career than by their being mothers. Essential feminists said no. There are biological and physiological differences between men and women. Those things are of equal value and they are to be celebrated. Both sexes have equal moral value, and the maternal nature is important to recognize and celebrate. In the 1980s, the church began to engage in this dialogue. And in 1984 in England, an organization was formed called Men, Women, and God. And this group of evangelicals in England supported the egalitarian position. And out of that became a whole movement within the evangelical and charismatic churches towards egalitarianism. In 1987, 3 years later, in the United States, a counter-organization was begun called Christians for Biblical Equality. And they were consciously functioning from a Judeo-Christian worldview, and they associated with the difference feminism, that part of the feminist movement that recognized that men and women were different. And just as within the feminist movement, there was a debate between these two groups, and the egalitarian group won, the same discussion, battle, whatever you want to call it, has raged within the evangelical church. Whole denominations and churches have been divided over this issue, but the fight did not begin in the church. It began with the feminist movement and has come into the church, and the church has been divided between egalitarianism and complementarianism. I would suggest there is a middle ground. If you see in this slide, on the left, it's colored green. And you have a syncretism with monism, a syncretism with modern feminism. And this syncretism within the church is egalitarianism, the downplaying of differences and saying men and women are basically interchangeable. And on the other side, in the red, you have a syncretism with sexism or atomism. And this is chauvinism. And we know, we look in the church and there is a lot of chauvinism in the church. And this is where the church has embraced sexist culture. And indeed, it has often led to the crushing of women within the church. But then you have the middle ground. You think of what Paul writes in Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, whether it is a sexist world or a feminist world. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the renewing of the mind begins with the Trinitarian order, the Trinitarian principle that God is the one and the many God. That is the foundation for a complementarian understanding of male and female, equal in value, different in role and function, and those different roles and functions are equally valuable for the whole. And here you find the celebration of the dignity of women as women, not the celebration of men as opposed to women, or the disappearance of women as they seek to become like men.